Hands. One of the privileges of being a priest is the giving of bread at communion, and I often notice your hands. Take a moment to look at your own hands. Open, ready to receive. Sometimes one hand, sometimes two. Sometimes in the sign of the cross, as some of us were taught many years ago in confirmation classes. Some hands cupped like a bowl, ready to receive grace. Some hands have lots of rings, some hands have none. Some hands have tattoos, some have pretty colours of nail polish. Some hands are workers' hands, lined and creased. Some are gardeners' hands, scratched and discoloured. Some hands are dry. Some hands are smooth. Some are a little shaky. Others are still. But it's a joy each Sunday to place that bread into your hands. Our hands that bring us to communion have already shared the peace, made the sign of the cross, turned the pages in the liturgy, put something into the collection, rubbed together with the cold, and shaken the hand of a stranger or a friend. Your hands have made your breakfast, dressed and fed your children, driven you here, tagged you on and off on the bus, held your umbrella as you walked. Your hands might have texted or posted or twittered already, or maybe just wiped the sleep from your eyes and waved to a neighbour. Jairus comes to Jesus and kneels down and begs, with hands clasped maybe, or hands open and reaching. He asks Jesus to come and lay hands on his daughter who is dying. In the Greek, the phrase to lay hands on, there's an underlying meaning in it to do with the hands. It's about the power of God to create and protect and preserve creation. So the hands have creative force and healing that comes from God. Our hands have creative force and healing. And as Jesus is on his way to Jairus' house, the story is interrupted by a woman who comes and reaches her hand out to touch the hem of Jesus' cloak. She does not presume to stop him, to speak to him, to call out, to touch his hand. She cannot, because she is unclean. She just wants to touch the hem of his robe. She thinks that will be enough if she can just do that. But Jesus stops and asks, "Who touched me?" Well, silly question, say the disciples. Look at the crowds. Everyone's trying to touch you. But Jesus persists, and he looks through the crowd to find the woman. He picks her up from the ground. "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." But before he's finished speaking, word comes that it's too late for the daughter of Jairus. But he continues the journey anyway and arrives at Jairus' house. He sends everyone out of the room, and he takes the girl by the hand and says, "Talitha cum," little girl, get up. Will you come and lay hands on her? If only I can touch his robe. He takes the girl by the hand. Lots more hands, hands that reach out in hope, hands that heal, hands that receive healing. Now, at first glance, our reading from Paul's letter to the Corinthians doesn't seem to have anything to do with hands. You mightn't have thought it had anything to do with anything on first reading, but it does. It's about generosity and community. Paul is writing to the church in Corinth to seek support for the church in Jerusalem. He wants Corinth to help like other churches have. Rome and Macedonia have already offered money, and they've offered more than the church at Corinth have offered. So he asks the Corinthian church to consider what gift might be acceptable. Not so that it will cause hardship for them, but enough to rebalance the resources. He says, I do not mean there should be relief for others and pressure on you, but it's a question of fair balance between your present abundance and their need. It's a call from 2,000 years ago for the balancing of resources. It's a guide not just for us as churches, but for society, for tax systems and welfare systems. It's a call for reaching out and sharing with neighbour, both near and far. For in the offering and in the receiving, we all reach out our hands with openness, ready to receive the gift of grace. One writer, John Koenig, says, God, the multiplier of gifts, invests grace in the enterprise of the gospel and receives it back again in the form of ever-growing thanksgivings. Or to translate this circular flow more directly, the worldwide hospitality of believers, one to another, expands their ability to welcome God with their praises. The new humanity matures and God reaps benefits. The open hands that have received the love and grace of God in turn offer love to others in need, both near and far. The church in Corinth clearly did not feel that they should give to the church in Jerusalem, but Paul is beginning to help them to be the church of the world, not just of their own community. This last week in our monthly vestry meeting, we discussed how we are going to manage giving away a portion of our church's income every year. At our AGM earlier in the year, you approved a budget which for the first time in a while has a portion set aside to give away. And so vestry were looking at how would we do that? How would we divide that up? We talked about giving some for the city mission, some for church projects overseas, some for one-off appeals. We were looking for a balance between our wealth and others' needs, reaching out to hold hands with others, offering and receiving. Paul says, "For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich." The line there, generous act, the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, can also be translated grace, the grace of Christ freely given with open hands, the grace of Christ pouring his life out for us. On Friday, President Barack Obama preached a sermon about grace at the funeral of the Reverend Clementa Pinckney in Charleston, South Carolina. You will have probably at least seen the clips on the news of President Obama singing Amazing Grace, but it's well worth finding the whole sermon and reading it or watching it. He was giving a eulogy, but it was a profound sermon about grace and hope, the sufferings of the past, about racism and slavery. And in the true signature style of the black preacher, he brought the congregation with him as they encouraged him on. He said, "The grace of God is not earned. Rather, grace is the free and benevolent favour of God. God has visited grace upon us, for he has allowed us to see where we've been blind. He has given us the chance, where we've been lost, to find our best selves. We may not have earned it, this grace, with our rancour and complacency and short-sightedness and fear of each other, but we got it all the same. God gave it to us anyway. God's once more given us grace. But it's up to us now to make the most of it, to receive it with gratitude, and to prove ourselves worthy of this gift. After the sermon finished, American writer Diana Butler Bass tweeted, "A sermon just exploded Twitter." And she said, "It's amazing, the media are talking about grace." And then hot on the heels of the president's sermon came another grace-filled moment as the US Supreme Court ruled in favour of marriage equality across the whole country. Moments of great joy for so many couples and their families. Into our hands today, God pours grace and love. And it's up to us to reach out and receive the grace with an open hand, not with a clenched fist. Whether you feel you can be brave enough only to touch the hem of Jesus' robe, or whether you're brave enough to throw yourself at Jesus' feet, he will respond and fill your empty hands. Then we in turn can offer something to our neighbour. We go not empty-handed, but we go with God's love. The world needs love, and you have God's love in your hands today. How will you share it this week? Whose hands will you touch? For whom will you pray? Where will you go with God's grace?